Welcome to the Low-Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor. Welcome back to the podcast. I am here for another Journal Club episode with Dr. Laura Buchanan, who's now been with our practice for over 6 months, and it's been such a pleasure to work with her and her counterpart, Dr. Matt Calkins. Guys, I am so excited. We're going to be talking about something near and dear to my heart, something that struck me so powerfully that I had to write a letter to the editor. So this is going to be an exciting day. So Dr. Laura, what are we talking about?
Yeah, good morning. I'm excited to be here. So first, we're going to discuss the Keto-Med trial, and I'll actually go ahead and share my screen. So this got a lot of headlines when it came out.
Yeah, so we should talk about some of these headlines because, this study was done by Christopher Gardner. He's a very well-respected researcher from Stanford who's looked into nutrition for the past 2 or 3 decades. In fact, he's so well-respected in the field that he is now part of the guidelines committee for 2025. He's done several notable studies that have supported low carb in the past, and it seems like over the last 10 years, there's been this subtle effort to undermine some of those findings. And the Keto-Med study was done during the pandemic. So there's some pause and some applaud should be given to actually doing a study like this.
Yeah. But
some of the conclusions actually infuriated me. And I think the thing that tipped me off was seeing in the news that, keto is worse than Mediterranean for diabetes. So that triggered me.
Yeah, I've got a couple actually on the next slide, some headlines from the news, several.
Show us, yeah.
All right, so today we're going to be discussing, this is from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the effect of a ketogenic diet versus Mediterranean diet on glycated hemoglobin in individuals with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, the interventional Keto-Med randomized crossover trial, classically Keto-Med. So this is what Tro's talking about. After this paper came out, we had several major news articles, including MedPage Today, saying which is better, and the conclusions were basically from these news articles, Mediterranean diet wins.
What do you think about that? What do you think? What's your first blush,
Yeah.
What's first blush,
So when I was making this PowerPoint and going through this, I knew of Keto-Med, and I'd never really dived more deeper into the supplement and all of the other conclusions they were making. And if you were to obviously, if you were to look at the media outlets of any major study, they are definitely going to persuade your opinion based on what the researchers wanted them to say. So I think all of these, they either had a standard, news release from Stanford, which is where Gardner works, or they just read the conclusion. I doubt they even read the conclusion because these are news outlets. They probably had a news release and they just followed the party line.
Yeah, so you see trial finds slight winner. After what we will discuss today, you would think they might actually be referring to keto, but no, that title or that headline is referring to the Mediterranean diet, which we'll kind of go through why that's probably wrong.
Can I give a one word? So when these researchers, you have to understand the best researchers are also masters of engaging with media, engaging with different journalists, engaging with different news outlets. And you can see some use it for good. Dr. David Unwin is always in the papers. His latest study is always in the papers. And, I shouldn't say good, to support their beliefs, let's just say, right? I should probably say that. And I suspect, there's a researcher at Stanford who's just supporting his work and supporting his beliefs. So, and that's how these stories are usually picked up. So it's not surprising to see the news outlets siding with the author's opinions.
To be expected, yep.
Yeah. So now to dive into this, what this was looking to do was actually compare different formulations of a low carbohydrate diet, as these have not been tested in head-to-head trials to compare how they improve metabolic health. So this study sought to compare a traditional low carb diet versus a low carb diet with legumes, fruits, and whole grains in people with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. So you can see they both recommended to avoid added sugars and refined grains. And with the Mediterranean Plus, they also recommended including legumes, fruits, whole and intact grains, whereas you would continue to avoid those things on the whole food ketogenic diet. So initially they had 42 people. They ended up having some dropouts, again, due to the pandemic. So they finished with 33 individuals. This was a randomized crossover interventional trial. So what they actually did, you can see here. So they randomized people first, either the whole food ketogenic arm or the Mediterranean Plus diet. They continued that dietary pattern for 12 weeks, and then they immediately switched over to the opposite diet. And then for an additional 12 weeks, they told the participants to eat whatever they wanted. So this was a single site study, really people just from the San Francisco Bay Area, which is just important to note because that means the population might be different than, say, where you're from or where you live. The inclusion criteria, you had to be at least 18 years old and have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. The exclusion criteria is listed there, so very low weights, BMIs over 40, LDL greater than 190, uncontrolled blood pressure, and then certain medications like insulin, GLP-1s, SGLT2s, or if you were taking other weight loss medications. There are a few other exclusion criteria if you want to dive deep into that in the paper. So the actual intervention, people received weekly nutrition counseling by a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. And if they wanted additional education, they could actually get that up to 3 times per week. They were encouraged to eat until satiety, so nice and full. For the first 4 weeks of each dietary period, all food was actually provided, which is great. And so what they did to make sure that no one felt the urge to go consume food outside of the prescribed diet, they gave people the maximum number of calories that they thought the person who needed the most would require to not lose weight. So that ended up, they gave every single person 2,800 calories per day during this phase. And the food was both dairy-free and gluten-free for both groups. Then for the rest of the 8 weeks, so that 12 weeks on each dietary pattern, people were encouraged to continue their diet, but provide this food themselves. And then again, they crossed over, switched diet without any washout period.
Any problems with this chart? Do you have any comments on this slide?
No, I mean, I think, when I first was looking at the study, before I wrote the letter to the editor, I found it, somewhat interesting that the food provider was dairy-free and gluten-free. I actually looked them up to sort of see what their meals look like and what they had historically provided. And it looked like it pretty much checked out. The dairy-free part, actually, I think dairy-free ketogenic diets may favor ketogenic arms because sometimes dairy can be sort of a trigger food. So I did think at first that, okay, wait a second, this sort of stacks the odds in the keto favor a little bit. That's, unless they supplemented it with a lot of added oils, which they really didn't. So I thought the nutrition was pretty locked down. I mean, I don't know how you guys felt, but I thought it was, I thought this part was well designed. The only problem I had an issue with was the lack of a buffer period between the diets.
Exactly.
Yep.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think they actually did a really good job of giving people, when they provided those meals for the first 4 weeks, which is a total third of the time for each arm. That was actually a great idea, and I like that. I think they talked about why they didn't do a washout period between the diet arms, and that's going to be a major point of contention for this study. I think when you don't do a washout period, you are going to start to decrease the effect sizes between your interventions, because you're not going to have time to come back up to a baseline. And we're actually going to show in one of the slides that if you just take the first arm, that and they mention this, a single sentence in the conclusion, that there is going to be a difference. So we can, we'll talk about that near the end of the journal club.
I mean, so far it looks good.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't say it's, it seems like a, well, at least nutritionally, it seems like a pretty well-designed nutrition intervention. And I think the dairy-free actually, it could be a slight bias towards, because it's, typical ketogenic diets include tons of dairy.
I think the gluten-free could honestly favor or just make Mediterranean Plus also look a little bit better. So they almost, to me, are a little bit equivalent potentially.
Right. Yeah.
So the actual intervention for the whole food ketogenic diet, they recommended between 20 and 50 grams of carbohydrates per day, 1.5 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight, at least 3 servings of non-starchy vegetables, and sodium up to 5 grams, potassium up to 4 grams. And then they stopped, and this is essential, they stopped all patients' sulfonylureas, which is a medication that can cause your sugar to go dangerously low and also causes weight gain, which we'll get into a little bit later. And then on the Mediterranean Plus side, that is based on Mediterranean Diet Pyramid from Walter Willett, they decreased their sulfonylureas by 50%. If patients, or participants rather, had hyperglycemia above 180 consistently, then they added back the sulfonylureas.
So this is like my huge contention. Like, this is like, when I saw this, I was like, you're kidding me, right? Well,
yeah, this is where it gets good later on.
Okay, so I'm going to save it. So I mean, this is what triggered me.
Yeah, yeah. This is where the data gets great, and we'll go through that in detail.
It's about one of the 3 triggers for me for the study, but we'll talk about that at the end.
So, and this here is an unvalidated adherence scoring that the authors created. So if you look, they said, and they looked at net carbohydrates, not total carbohydrates, which a lot of us in the world that use ketogenic diets for prescription to help with metabolic health will actually use total carbohydrates rather than net carbohydrates. You could get a maximum of 4 points for each of these 5 categories, but your max score of adherence could only go up to 10. So if you stayed at net carb of less than 30, you got 4 points. Percent calories from fat greater than 65, again, 4 points. Making sure you had your non-starchy vegetables, no added grains, refined grains, etc., you get 4 points with a max of 10. And similarly, you can go through and look at the components of the adherence scoring at the bottom there. Again, this is an unvalidated adherence scoring that the authors created. And so there's no reason to say why with a net carb of less than 30 is that an adherence score of 4? Why is the max score of 10? This is just, to me, it's kind of made
like an arbitrary, metric they threw in.
Yeah, exactly. So the big outcomes they were looking at, the biggest primary was A1C. They looked at other metabolic labs as well, weight, blood pressure. Then they looked at total energy intake, nutrient intake, and then dietary adherence, using what we just went over. And then they had this exploratory CGM analysis. Some baseline data, they put 16 individuals in the whole food keto group and then 17 in the Med Plus up front. What I want to highlight here is that there were 8 patients on sulfonylureas out of 33 participants, which is about 24% of the study population. And remember that they differentially changed sulfonylureas between the 2 groups. So they stopped them in the whole food keto group and they cut them in half in the Med Plus group. So their results is that there was no difference in A1C and weight. And we're going to go through all these individually. Adherence to the Mediterranean was a little bit better, and nutrient intake was better with Mediterranean. So then we're going to go look at the supplement data and see if there's different conclusions that might be drawn. So here, again, no difference in A1C. There is a difference in triglycerides favoring the whole food ketogenic diet, and an increase, or a decrease rather, in the LDL that favored the Mediterranean Plus diet. So their conclusion was, after the study, the change in A1C with the primary study outcome improved significantly for participants on both diets, but was not significantly different between the whole food ketogenic and the Mediterranean plus phases. Regarding weight, again, we found that both the whole food keto and Med Plus were associated with improved blood glucose and reduced body weight, both of which occurred without guidance on caloric restriction and may relate to the similarity in the two diet patterns, which limited added sugar and refined sugars. No difference. Then we look at the adherence scores. Now, how they track people's dietary adherence is they actually did 3 unannounced 24-hour dietary recalls at baseline, food delivery, self-provided, and then follow-up. And then they also had people use an app called the Chronometer app, where it was a food log. So here you can see the adherence scores for the whole food keto and the Med Plus were very similar between the food delivery phases. It was also very similar during the self-provided phases, so people were adhering to the diet. And then for the 12-week follow-up period, following completion of the 2 12-week diet phases, participants could choose to follow whatever dietary pattern they preferred, fully or partially following either the whole food ketogenic diet or Med Plus, a combination, or neither. So they really did not have guidance on what to do during that 12-week follow-up. It was up to them. And so the authors concluded, finally, regardless of benefits, diets need to be sustainable. And our study suggests it was difficult for participants to maintain the whole food ketogenic diet, because you can see the adherence score dropped at the follow-up. If you look at this compared to here, the follow-up favored the Mediterranean plus. So that is their conclusion. So, and this was actually published on Stanford, Dr. Christopher Gardner, keto and Mediterranean diets both help manage diabetes, but one is easier to maintain.
Oh, geez.
Oh yeah, it's going to be good. So then we look at the nutrient intake. And I want to ask you kind of your thoughts on this. So the baseline intake of individuals was roughly about 1,800 calories. During the study, it dropped to about 1,500 calories, and for some people, all the way down to 1,100 calories per day. And just in general, do you think that's realistic that these people were consuming 1,500, maybe down to 1,100 calories per day?
No, people with obesity and diabetes likely underestimate calories using trackers by about 40%. Doctors underestimate by 20%. Dietitians by 10%. So, I have a history of obesity. I'm a subconscious eater. A lot of times I just pass the kitchen and something, I'd grab some nuts, or I'd grab because there's no dairy in my whole food ketogenic diet package, I'm grabbing a slice of cheese, So I think that you have to look at these with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. And that's very important later, actually, for some of their conclusions.
Yeah. And I also wanted to point out on this slide, because we're going to see this slide again when we reinterpret this data. But remember, they thought that the maximum person in the study would eat 2,800 kilocalories a day. So that's how much they gave them during the food delivery period.
So these people were, out of 2,800 kilocalories given to them, they only ate 1,500 of those 2,800 and let the other 1,300 go to waste or give it to their family. Doubtful. So their conclusion, intake was not higher for the whole food keto diet for any nutrients, but was higher for the Mediterranean plus for fiber and 3 nutrients, vitamin C, folate, and magnesium. So this was on the right. You can see a table that lists all these different vitamins and minerals, and again, fiber and omega-3 intake, kind of comparing the nutritional intake of these different dietary patterns. In addition to, and the authors conclude, finally, in addition to fiber, participants had greater decreases in essential nutrients on the whole food keto diet, folate, vitamin C, and magnesium, than on the Med Plus. Collectively, these potential harms likely relate to avoiding legumes, fruits, and whole intact grains on the whole food keto diet, and temper enthusiasm for avoiding these food groups, which is consistently recommended by national and international public health organizations. Just a little bit of bias there from the authors.
Just a little bit, huh?
Just a little bit, yeah. So
they couldn't cut up some peppers and some raw peppers and, get some vitamin C in the keto group? Like, it was that hard to cut up some?
So what's really interesting, when you actually go and look at the, again, another supplemental table, we actually don't have this one in here. You look at the nutrient, all those different vitamins and minerals during the groups, during the time period, the first 4 weeks when food was provided, they also had lower nutritional value on the whole food keto arm. This was provided to the participants, so they designed it actually to have less nutritional value. You could have easily created a whole food ketogenic diet that had equivalent nutritional value as the Mediterranean Plus, but they designed it not to. So here we see a little bit more bias come out. Although reducing carbohydrate intake is often recommended as a strategy to control blood glucose in patients with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, the metabolic benefits and risks of extreme versus moderate carbohydrate restriction are unclear. Extreme seems a little bit excessive to me. What about very low carbohydrate diet, therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, which are universally agreed upon terms?
How many times have you heard extreme carbohydrate restriction, Tro?
In this field, I've never heard of it, you know?
Yeah. Why do you think somebody would choose the word extreme for describing a dietary pattern?
If you ask me, my heart of hearts, okay, in my heart of hearts, you know, either they think they're doing some noble, it's a noble lie. I suspect they think that, you know, hey, look, I'm going to help the world with plants. I mean, he's devoted his life to sort of plant-based nutrition. I don't know, because I'm triggered by all of this.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Let's go more about it, you know?
Yeah, it's a white hat bias. So I did a Google search for just finding how many times extreme carbohydrate restriction has entered the research realm ever since indexing was started with Google Scholar, which is all data, all research and history of research. And it has been used exactly 130 times.
Which is nothing in research. You get, when you type in carbohydrate restriction, you'll get
millions.
Yeah,
millions of hits.
Yeah.
So then we can also look at extreme fat restriction, which has been basically mentioned 33 times in the history of research. So even with those extreme word choices, there's still a bias against low carb.
So that's going to tie into this, my favorite part, which is now the results reinterpreted. So we're going to go look at some alternative conclusions based on the data that they actually provide. We're going to look at glycemia. We're going to look at weight, kind of go over the adherence and the nutrients again. So here, they performed a sensitivity analysis, which is common for papers to do a sensitivity analysis where they exclude groups that may affect the outcome. So when they took into account those different dosages of the sulfonylureas and excluded those for 4 participants, we observed significant differences for both A1C and HDL cholesterol values between diets, favoring the whole food ketogenic diet. So basically, A1C and HDL got better on a whole food ketogenic diet than Mediterranean Plus. That should have been the conclusion of this paper up front. Additionally, you can see that the average glucose was also significantly improved on a whole food ketogenic diet compared to the Mediterranean Plus diet.
And this was the title of our letter to the editor, you know, bias against the keto diet. The problem that I had here, I went back and I recalculated the average A1C reduction from using a sulfonylurea, which is an old drug. Really, nobody should be on it on this point. It's not an ideal medication. There are a lot of better choices. Not to say that nobody you know, there are some reasons to use it, like cost and if you've been on it, but these drugs are generally very powerful, and we don't use them because their side effects, which, you know, particularly in the elderly, they can cause people to get low blood sugar, right? And they also cause people to gain weight.
Yep.
So what happened? But they're very powerful, and they can reduce A1C on the label. I think if I remember correctly, it's a A1C reduction of like 1.8, something close to 2. So if you go back and you factor that in to the A1C reductions, this was a wildly successful trial. And in their own sensitivity analysis, if you exclude those people, a ketogenic diet was better for A1C reduction.
And they actually acknowledge that in the conclusion of the paper. And they say the A1C and HDL cholesterol values shifted to statistical significance, which is, again, weird wording. They should have just said straight up, A1C and HDL cholesterol statistically were better in the whole food ketogenic arm.
Yeah, 12% of people had a differential sulfonylurea dosing, which we know changes someone's A1C, their glycemia. And so I think I don't know if the researchers didn't understand that. Like, do they know that sulfonylureas decrease glycemia? They have to, because they're very smart people. There are other studies I've seen that have taken into account changes in A1C with changes in medication. There's an A1C medication score that could have easily enveloped all of this data. And honestly, that should have been in their protocol. They had the sulfonylurea dose protocolized. They should have had their primary outcome take that into account. It is very bizarre for me, for people this intelligent, to not take that into account in their primary outcome.
Well,
and I think it was purposeful.
Hold on. We know it's purposeful, but because they're sitting down and writing this. But what I'd like to say is also look at where his previous studies have been published, and look at where this was published. So this author, Gardner, has gotten several publications in New England Journal of Medicine, in JAMA, and look at where this one was published. And it tells you it gives you an idea of who rejected the paper, right? So I suspect there was a lot of notable journals that this was submitted to that probably came to the same conclusions we did. Like, there's no way we can accept it based on your conclusions. But then, the American Society of Nutrition, their journal may have been a little bit more favorable and sort of allowed these conclusions to come in. Because I agree with you. It should have said, hey, actually, ketogenic diet's better.
Yeah, you can de-prescribe more of a dangerous medication that can cause hypoglycemia requiring hospitalization and also cause you to weight gain if you go on a whole food ketogenic diet compared to a Mediterranean plus diet.
That sounds like the right conclusion.
Right? So then we start looking at the glycemia. So this is the blood sugar, looking at the continuous glucose monitoring data that's available. They call this exploratory because they did not register on clinicaltrials.gov. But here you can see on these Violin plots, so these are the average glucose at baseline for the whole food ketogenic group here in blue, and the Mediterranean plus in yellow. So if we look just here,
with people with pre-diabetes,
you can see during the food delivery time period in the self-provided that the average sugar dropped from 113 down to 102 on the whole food keto, whereas it almost didn't change actually from the Mediterranean plus, 113 to 112.
Yeah, I mean that's a 10-point drop, versus a no change.
Yeah, which is definitely significant. And then we look at patients who have type 2 diabetes. There's a 30-point drop in blood sugar with the whole food ketogenic group. And that
despite getting more medications discontinued.
Yep, exactly. And you compare that to the Mediterranean plus, they still did have some drop. Again, this was with 50% reduction rather than stopping those medications, of about a little less than 20. And then even during the self-provided time, you had a significantly more of a drop on the whole food keto group compared to the Mediterranean plus, which only dropped a little over 10 points. So they've put the decrease in the average glucose value from CGM data was significantly lower during the whole food ketogenic diet compared with the Mediterranean plus. For participants with prediabetes, the effect of the diet on blood glucose were moderate as expected and were greater for the whole food ketogenic diet. So they concluded, although the whole food keto diet was associated with improved glucose control on several CGM metrics, the difference in A1C values were modest. So they de-emphasized the fact that CGM metrics got a whole lot better with more deprescription and just wanted to re-point out that the A1C was not that different. Again, ignoring the deprescription piece.
I think this was a clear setup. The CGMs were better. The A1C was better when they factored the medications they stopped. I felt the way you guys did. I mean, when you guys read this, I don't know how many more slides we have, and maybe, we'll sort of be very careful about how many more studies we discuss today. But what was your overall sentiment? Like, you poured through the data. Is there any other data you want to discuss before we talk?
Yeah, we've got
about that?
14 slides left that I think are important to kind of go through.
Okay.
And we'll get to our sentiment, which it'll be, I think, clear.
Yeah.
So let's reinterpret the weight data now. Their conclusion was there is no statistical difference with weight loss. Well, if you just look at the first 12 weeks, this is a randomized trial. The baseline data was the same between groups. There is a statistically different and increased weight loss in the whole food ketogenic group. So, and this Matt was referencing a little bit earlier on, but there's no washout period after this now going forward.
So it seems like when you do a crossover trial with diets without a washout period, it seems like this trial specifically was designed to find no difference between the groups after the end of phase 2. If you were to just take the people at the end of phase 1 and just compared the whole food keto diet group to the Med Plus group, and remember, this is a randomized trial, so baselines were the exact same between the groups. There was no statistical significant difference. The end of phase 1 is essentially a straight head-to-head trial of the whole food keto and Med Plus group.
And they concluded in sensitivity analysis, addressing changes in medications or looking at only the first phase of the crossover. Again, differences in A1C and HDL cholesterol favored the whole food keto. And as you saw, it favored a difference in weight as well.
So you lose more weight, your A1C is better, you come off more meds, and you get to enjoy steak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a win-win-win.
That's a good conclusion. Yeah. So now when we look at the adherence formulas, again, these are not validated. They were made for this study, and we don't know if the points or this weight system for these actually reflects a true well-formulated ketogenic diet in real life. This is just what they created. So do we have the answer of, well, how could you really validate adherence to these two diets? No. But does that mean we can trust their adherence scoring that they created? I would also argue no. The other thing that's important is when we look at the adherence data, they like to point out that more people at the follow-up period adhered to a Mediterranean plus diet. And so therefore, it was easier to do that. But again, they did not tell people what to do. They basically said, you can do whatever you want during the follow-up. So when we actually look at the baseline, people at baseline did not follow a whole food ketogenic diet. Their adherence basically was 0.9. Whereas if you look at the baseline for the Med Plus, people actually just normally ate much more closely to the Med Plus diet, 3.3. When you look at the follow-up for the whole food ketogenic diet score is actually much higher. So it goes from 0.9 to 2.3 with a difference of 1.4. Whereas if you compare the baseline and follow-up of the Mediterranean Plus score, there's only a difference of 1. So in reality, subjects changed their diets in such a way that the magnitude of the change was higher for the whole food ketogenic diet compared to Mediterranean Plus. So you might instead include, well, what they concluded was there was a larger difference towards a whole food ketogenic diet than towards a Mediterranean Plus diet in individuals.
This is, this gets worse and worse the more deeper we go.
Yeah.
I don't think, just to reconvey to the listener what we're talking about here, the researchers claim that that people were not able to adhere to the diet, when in fact they did better at adhering to the diet after the study on a ketogenic arm than they did the Mediterranean arm. That's crazy, in my opinion.
Yeah, essentially, remember Gardner said that the adherence to the Med Plus diet was more favorable, and that's what their conclusion was. But essentially, when you take into account their baseline diets, you could have just as easily said in your conclusion that people shifted back towards their baseline diet anyways. So that's the point number 2 on this, because their baseline diet was more closely aligned with a Med Plus score. And they never even mentioned that. They never mentioned what the adherence score was at baseline. And also, when you take into account the shifts, they actually shifted more towards the whole food keto diet than the Med Plus. I just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah.
So then we start looking at the nutrients, and you already brought up an excellent point here. The amount of calories consumed is very, very likely inaccurate, which means the nutrients, the amount of vitamins and minerals you're consuming is inaccurate. So that's point 1. Point 2, and this is just point out, so with total carbohydrates or carbohydrates consumed, they actually did reach pretty close to that less than 50 gram goal, but they were not consuming less than 20 or less than 30 grams per day, which again, that is of total carbohydrates that is often used as a prescription strength ketogenic diet. Here, again, the reported energy intake during these 2 phases was 300 calories lower than baseline and likely much lower than they were actually consuming. So the authors themselves say that because of this, the nutrition data should be taken into consideration when interpreting the nutrient intake data, which we will definitely take that into consideration.
So basically, it's like, don't rely on this.
Yeah, basically, this is kind of useless, honestly. You are way underestimating calories. So therefore, if you are not telling us exactly what you're eating, your vitamin intake, your mineral intake, your fiber, omega-3 intake, all of that data is going to be off if you're not correctly reporting what you are consuming. So what if now we reinterpret the results for a new conclusion? In fact, when we look at their own supplement, so their data, glycemia improved on a whole food ketogenic diet, weight improved on a whole food ketogenic diet. The adherence data and the nutrient data, you can't even interpret that data. There's not enough information provided. So the takeaway Gardner said is that there was no additional overall health benefit in cutting out legumes, fruits, and whole grains to achieve an ultra low carb diet. For people with diabetes or pre-diabetes, the less restrictive Mediterranean diet was similarly effective in controlling glucose and likely more sustainable. Well, why don't we instead conclude that the whole food ketogenic diet demonstrated marked improvement in glycemia over the Med Plus diet? Additionally, medications that promote weight gain and cause dangerous hypoglycemia were able to be reduced or stopped more effectively on the whole food ketogenic diet. Subjects ended up changing their diets more in the direction of a whole food ketogenic diet than a Mediterranean Plus diet. LDL-C increased, but unfortunately, we did not measure ApoB, which has been shown to be minimally or not affected by a ketogenic diet.
So I like your conclusion much better. Look, I think it's tough for people to understand, and maybe I should pause here. Are there some slides to go over?
That's it, Tro. We're unleashing you.
Okay, because it's tough for people to understand. Like, what do you mean there's bias, Tro? What do you mean, Dr. Laura? What do you mean, Dr. Matt? What do you mean there's bias in nutrition? And this is a clear example, right? And it's very subtle, and if you look, we're not going to have time to go over diet fits, I think, today. And, certainly we can do another journal club to talk about diet fits and Dr. Adrian Sotomoto's reanalysis with Dr. David Ludwig and some others. But you saw the same patterns in his previous trial after the A to Z, where there's this subtle push to equalize the results. Mm-hmm. And you can see that in this trial design. There's no reason to stop more medications in the ketogenic arm. You could stop everybody's medication the same. No review board that's, where you're claiming to monitor people with a CGM would, have an issue with you stopping a medication in one arm versus the other. especially since supposedly to date, all diets are the same, right? So, so the issue is they set up the trial, they stopped more medications in one arm, they didn't do the washout, and it was very clear that this was set up to fail. And when people say, Troy, why do you get so mad at some of these academics? Why do you get so mad at the researchers? Then the news media and like sort of social media, nutrition people start to just parrot the message, and you get a lot of people who are confused, right? And it really does a lot of damage to just basically healing people. I mean, if you see this, you're like, well, I have diabetes, maybe it doesn't matter what I do, right? And that's a really harmful message. And the only way I can reconcile that they would be okay with this, is if they thought they were doing some good. And because it's flat out lying to me.
It is lying. And here on the left side of the screen, you can see another post from Stanford. Keto's more severe carb restrictions did not provide additional overall health benefits. And there are a lot of people who trust Stanford, and that is what they're going to see. And then now they're going to think Mediterranean will have the exact same benefits potentially for them, which this clearly shows is not true.
Yeah, look, we all have our blinders on, and I don't know if they have their blinders on or if this is a little bit more sort of manipulative. I suspect, given the intricacies of the trial design and where this paper likely failed to get into, that people pointed out the issues. I bet you, if we were able to see the reviewer notes from the other journals that this was rejected from, we would see, statements that are probably so close to yours right now. I wish they actually made those public.
Yeah.
That would be shining light on the situation. That should be we should lobby the major journals to do that.
Yeah, to publish the rejection comments. I think that or at least after a paper is published in a different journal, or I don't know. But, bottom line with this Keto-Med study is what it seems like from my vantage point is they set up the trial to be equalized by stopping more meds in the keto arm. They also discounted some of the effect that may happen over the longer term by basically changing, by having no washout period between the diets, and then letting people sort of go for the last, it was months, right? Remind me again, it was 4 weeks, 2 weeks, and 4 weeks, right?
12 weeks, 12 weeks, 12 weeks.
Okay,
the 4 weeks was when they provided the diet.
Yeah, so it was 4 weeks and then 12 weeks overall. I got to be honest, it was disappointing. So disappointing. I called up Eric Westman and I was like, we have to write because this is, it's misleading. So when I say to people that nutrition is biased, what do you think? Do you think it's conspiracy talk or, what do you think, Dr. Laura?
I think this study is evidence of the bias. Like this, I try not to be cynical, but I think this was pure bias. And for researchers, it is shameful to have published something like this.
I wouldn't go as far as to say shameful. Okay.
I think I would. They purposely are misleading people and they are manipulating the news. And then this is going to change what people actually end up doing to try to benefit their health. And they are misleading people. And that's bad.
Yeah. Look, I got to be honest. I agree. Okay. I agree. I hope at the least that they just think they're doing some good, right? But this is really bad. This is really bad for all of my patients with diabetes, all of my patients who are lowering their carbohydrates. This is bad for them. And the conclusion should have been, and we actually wrote this, but Eric softened my tone, Dr. Eric Westman, when we wrote that letter to the editor. I said the conclusion should have been that the ketogenic diet is more effective at decreasing medications, right? That should have been the conclusion. So yeah, I'm with you. So what's your Dr. Matt, Dr. Laura, Dr. Matt? Give me your last sentence. What did this make you feel?
Yeah, it's a little bit dejected because again, it's a very well-known research lab. My background is in physics, and you can't really manipulate. Nobody has they do have their pet string theories, right? But you're not going to be able to manipulate theory, or you're not going to be able to manipulate a trial in physics, I think, as well as you can manipulate something like this. And I do think there's white hat bias. I think that they truly believe, maybe for the environment or just for health in general, that the Med Plus arm was going to always be better. And so they set up the trial to give it as much of a head start as possible. It's like doing a 400-meter sprint, and the Med Plus started at 300 meters for this. So the whole food keto diet was always coming from behind.
Yeah, and it's tough to explain this to people. It's tough to explain, the average person that's listening to this to understand nutritional bias, but it's there. It's definitely there. So I'm going to open up to some questions. Nancy asked, there were journals that refused to publish the study. Actually, Nancy, we don't know that. We don't know for certain that this study was rejected from other journals. But if you look at the other journals that this author has been published in, which includes the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Diet Fits was published in JAMA, New England Journal of Medicine was published in, A to Z was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So if you look at his highly prominent trials, they were published in sort of very prestigious journals. And you wonder, if he tried to get these published in those journals and didn't succeed. You wonder if, because it ended up in a great journal, but not of the same caliber. So there's probably, you'd imagine that there was a reviewer who said exactly what Dr. Laura just brought up and what Dr. Matt just brought up. This is, your conclusions don't match the data. Any other comments, guys, before we call it a day? Because I think we have another lecture coming up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. If anyone wants to stay and join me at 8:30, I'll be discussing continuous glucose monitors a little bit more in depth and some of the benefits they provide.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We looks like we got 15 people in the room live early in the morning who care about science, want to learn about science. Dr. Laura and Dr. Matt, thank you so much for putting this together. I guess the last conclusion is keto is better than Mediterranean and patients with diabetes and weight to lose. I can stand behind that message.
Same. All right. Thanks, Joe. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Joe.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye, everybody.